No, but when as she got older, I mean, I had to get all of these. Even if you had, yeah, because you know what's higher now. Yes. Together. Yeah, I just got that. Oh, that's the Schindler. No, I never. I got to see her first. Yeah, because I did that. After I had that. You did that?
Yes. I broadcasted. So.
Because you have that, but you know what, you probably were shot. I mean, it doesn't prove that.
No. You're allowed. I don't think these ladies fight. I can't guarantee it, but.
Guess what? I just have a heart. Very seldom.
Hair look as bad as I feel like I have childhood.
Well, guess what? You didn't get such a break.
Yeah. Are you ready, sir? All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the penultimate Iowa Files. My name is Gail Brubaker and I'm the Executive Director for the West Des Moines Historical Society based out of the Jordan House Museum. We want to thank our partners, the West Des Moines Public Library, our sponsors, the Friends Foundation for the Public Library, Diana and Scott Hatfield and the Iowa Arts Council, and our members and donors. If you would like to join that illustrious group, there are donation envelopes on a lot of the chairs, and we have a donation box in the back. We greatly appreciate any support you're willing to give us to continue this educational programming. So our presenter today, Sandi Yoder, is the director of the Iowa Jewish Historical Society. She's been with the society since 2008, which is like more than 5 years. I was a journalism major. That's the extent of my math. Sandi holds an MA in history and an MBA from the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and a BA in history from Lenore-Ryan College in North Carolina. She is responsible for everything at the place, and I feel you, Sandi. Management, development, promotion, and funding of the Iowa Jewish Historical Society. And if you're ever curious about what happens behind the scenes at living historical museums such as Colonial Williamsburg, sit down with a cup of coffee with this lady. The stories are fantastic. So thank you today for joining us for the Iowa Files.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here. Gail and I have worked on many projects together and looking forward to working together more in the future. Before we really get started, I wanted to ask how many of you, before you saw the advertisements for today's talk, had ever heard of the Iowa Jewish Historical Society? And please be honest. Had anybody ever heard of it? Okay. One. Okay, thank you. I think like many small historical organizations, we're still fighting to get our name known. How many of you had heard before today's program, had heard of Celina Karp Biniaz? That's a few more. Thank you very much. One of the things I wanted to tell you a little bit about was the Historical Society first, and then we'll talk about Celina and the book Saved by Schindler, which we published about 1.5 years ago. The Historical Society, the Iowa Jewish Historical Society, was established formally in 1996. So we're getting close to being 30 years old. The reason it was established is for the same reason that most historical societies are established. And that goes back to the formation of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. It's our parent organization. We're a department within the Federation. And the Federation was actually established in 1914. And it was, at first, it was a way that the Jewish community, and especially the different congregations and the individuals, could get together and more equitably raise money to support the community, to support the social service needs and that. It eventually grew over the next 100 and some years. And there's a school, a Jewish religious school, a preschool, historical museum, and we do a lot within the community and outside the community. In 1989, the Federation was celebrating its 75th birthday. And as part of that celebration, they put together a display committee, and it was to focus on the history of the Jewish community in central Iowa. And at that time, they realized that they were getting wonderful artifacts from different families within the community to share, and that showed so much of the history of the Jewish people. But no one was collecting these permanently. So out of that realization came the desire to form the Historical Society. And over the next couple of years, that's exactly what they did, and established us in 1996. And since that time, we've grown from an idea of the community to an award-winning organization. We've won awards for a project that we're doing. It's an ongoing project called Honoring Iowa's Jewish Veterans, where we're trying to identify all of Iowa's Jewish veterans across the state. We started with a list of approximately 25, and it's now grown to nearly 1,500. And we know we're missing a lot of people. So if you have any Jewish friends who haven't given us the information, please let us know. Like many people who are tracing veterans' information, it's a bit of a challenge because the armory in Kansas City burned in the 1940s, and a lot of information was lost. But we have records dating back to the Civil War and literally through people serving today. That project and the scope of it has won an award, a statewide award, and so has the Celina programs that we began in 2017. The Historical Society itself is there to help inspire people of all backgrounds to become interested in and help preserve the culture and the history of the Jewish people in Iowa. Very few people within the state realize that the Jewish people have settled in over 100 cities and towns across Iowa since the 1830s. The first permanent Jewish settler came in 1833, came from Alsace in France, and settled in the Dubuque area, established a grocery store. His name was Alexander Levy, and he's also the first naturalized citizen of Iowa. According to some of the newspaper accounts we've seen, Alexander and some friends got in a boat and went down to St. Louis, because at that time, Iowa was still a territory, a part of Wisconsin. And they went down there to be naturalized, and Alexander was second in line. There was a very shy Irishman who was in front. He was unsure of what to do, so he literally stepped back, let Alexander become the first person, and he became Iowa's first naturalized citizen. From the Jewish people came to Iowa for the same reasons that most other immigrants came. Obviously for religious freedom, but also for economic development. Europe was still had a system of what they called primogeniture, where the eldest son or the eldest person, usually the son, inherited. And there were pogroms throughout Eastern Europe, especially, and many of the Jewish people came here. And over the years, they came through New York, and they also came through Galveston. Today, the Jewish population in Iowa is estimated to be somewhere around 14 to 15,000, only 1 or 2%. The largest population of Jewish people is here in Des Moines. There's also very active communities in the Quad Cities and Iowa City and Waterloo and Council Bluffs and Sioux City, Mason City, and others that I haven't named. At one point, Sioux City was one of the leading Jewish communities because it was kind of a jumping off point for people who were going farther north, farther west. In fact, part of what we're going to be talking about with Celina's story is that after the Holocaust ended and survivors were coming to Iowa, Sioux City was actually the largest, the most numerous place where Holocaust survivors were listed as coming to Iowa. Now, many of them didn't stay. That they jumped off and went west or went north. But the Sioux City congregation was very supportive. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about too is the reason talking about the Holocaust and the personal stories is so important is that I think it was the New York Times did a survey a couple of years ago, which asked adults and millennials how much they knew about the Holocaust. And unfortunately, only about 11% of adults and only about 20% of millennials had ever even heard of the Holocaust. And of those who thought they might have heard of it or had heard of it, they thought that only 2 million people were murdered during the Holocaust and not the 6 million Jews and the millions of other people who also were murdered. The Roma, which is the modern word for gypsies, disabled people, people of different religions, Jehovah's Witnesses were on that list, and there were millions of others who were murdered. What we're going to talk about today is Celina Karp Biniaz, and Celina is one of the last living survivors from Schindler's List. Recently, the Jewish Museum of New York had a gala in New York in December where they wanted to honor the descendants of Schindler's List survivors and any Schindler's List survivors who were still living. And the last time I talked with them, they could only find 4 or 5. And Celina is one of those 4 or 5. And it makes total sense because she was the youngest who was listed on Schindler's List. At the time her name was added to Schindler's List, she was only 13 years old. And Celina was born in Krakow in 1931. She'll kill me if I add 100 years to her age. In 1931, and she will be 93 years old this coming summer. And her early life was wonderful. There was a large Jewish community in Krakow. They were middle class or upper middle class. Her father was an accountant. He also was in management. Her mother was a bookkeeper. And she can remember going to Snow White for one of her birthday parties. And then on September 1st, 1939, the whole world changed. She was she had just finished up 2nd grade. She was 8 years old and the Germans invaded. And life, of course, changed. In Krakow, eventually the Krakow ghetto was formed, and she and her family were in that Krakow ghetto. They were prisoners. Life was as horrible as you've read in every account of the Holocaust. In their case, they were lucky, if you can use the term lucky in relationship to the Holocaust. Again, Celina's parents had some contacts. They had been working, and they were working with a gentleman called Julius Madrich. And when they had papers and they were able to work. And what they also did was to falsify, they found a way to falsify papers for Celina. And they added 2 years to her age at some point during their stay in the Krakow ghetto. What that meant was life, because they had jobs, they were going out and managing and being a bookkeeper. But now with what they called a blue card, Celina could go out and work, and she wound up sewing. They were making uniforms for the German army and other types of things. So this gave her a way of working and staying alive. There were horrendous incidents in the ghetto. Her mother, Phyllis Karp, talked about one where the Germans told the people within the Jewish people in the ghetto to make sure that they left their kids at home that day, and that their kids would be there for them when they got back. The Karps just had a bad feeling about it, and according to one of the stories, dressed Celina older and took her with them. And then that night when the parents got back, they found all of the 800 children dead. One of the things that Phyllis Karp talks about is that she couldn't understand first how anybody could do that. But secondly, the person who had ordered it came in and out of where she was working all the time, and he had a little girl of his own. And she couldn't understand how someone who had his own family could order that done. Life was not good, but they had a way out. After 5 years in the ghetto, the Germans were liquidating the ghetto, and they were moved to what was the Plaszow work camp. And this too was where they were lucky enough to be able to continue working. They worked there for Julius Madrich, and his name becomes very important because he's the one that adds them to Schindler's List. At the same time, running parallel to this, Oskar Schindler, as many of you have probably heard, was not the gentleman with the best reputation, shall we say. He was definitely a Nazi. He believed in what they were doing. He was leading the good life. He was a womanizer. He was frequently called the cad. His marriage was very broken. But then all of a sudden, when he saw the cruelty that was happening to the workers in his factories, he had an epiphany, and he decided that he wanted to fight that and to help save the Jewish workers. What he did was to convince the Germans through talk as well as through bribery that he could help the war effort by building a munitions factory. Schindler himself had other factories. He had an enamelware factory where they made enamelware cups and plates and things like that for the German war effort, for things like in mess kits. He had other types of factories who did the same thing. But he told the Germans that he could take some of the Jewish prisoners and build a munitions factory would help them fight the war. And after a bit of time, they agreed to let him do that. And he gathered the names of roughly 300 women and roughly 800 men. And those were the 1,100, 1,150, 1,200 people that he eventually moved to Czechoslovakia. Many people think there was just this one big list, but the list changed. One of the ways that the Karps got on the list was that they were, I guess I mentioned Julius Madrich. They were working for Madrich. He was a friend of Oskar Schindler's. And when Schindler came up with this idea about taking the Jewish prisoners and getting them to relative safety in Czechoslovakia, he asked his friend Madrich to go in with him because Madrich also had factories. And Madrich told him no, that he was tired of everything that was happening and that he was going home to Vienna. Then what Schindler did, he said, well, then give me some names of some of your workers and I'll add that to my list. And among the 60-some names that Madrich added to Schindler's list were 3, Irvin, Phyllis, and Celina Karp. And that was how they got on Schindler's list. And as I said, this list kept changing. I mean, it changed almost daily as some of the prisoners, left. He couldn't prevent some of the cruelties that happened in the camp, but the names kept changing. And then Celina was on this list. And in late 1944, the prisoners were going to be moved to Brunlitz, Czechoslovakia. The 800 plus men were put into the cattle cars, railroad cars, and what they didn't know or hadn't been told was that along the way, they thought they were just going straight to Czechoslovakia. What happened was they went to a different concentration camp where they were deloused, they were looked over for medical reasons because they didn't want any diseases going to this to the new factory. So, but there was no communication between the men and the women, so they knew nothing about it. So the men got to Brunlitz, and then it was time for the women. What the women believed was going to happen was they were going to go straight to Brunlitz. And so they got on the railroad cars, and then the next thing they know, it was night. It was a couple days, but it was night when they arrived at Auschwitz. And they had believed that the women in the cars believed that this had been done on purpose as a way of getting more bribery money out of Schindler. What the researcher for our book found out was that there had been one woman in the office there who knew that they were going to stop at Auschwitz, but had told nobody. And by that time, people knew what Auschwitz was. And so they had no idea that they were arriving at Auschwitz. And instead of arriving to see their friends, the men, it may be a family member, it may just have been people they knew, they wound up being unloaded at Auschwitz. And obviously it was terrifying. They were taken into the showers. They had heard what showers were done. And in this case, the showers were actually water. And what you're going to hear in a few moments is Celina's voice telling you about what that felt like. In Auschwitz, the days were very long. It was cold. It was, these women were prisoners, just like the tens of thousands of others who were prisoners at Auschwitz. They spent their mornings, there were 4 times a day when they had to get in line for 2 or 3 hours at a time to be counted. There was very little food. They were sleeping 5 people in one bunk. As Celina says, if you wanted to turn over, all 5 had to turn at the same time. And what they had done is one's head would be up here and the other person's feet so that you could make room for 5 in that bunk. Celina had the experience, as did several other people, thousands, of running into Dr. Mengele. And her mother was the Germans came and asked if anybody wanted to volunteer to work in the kitchen that morning. And Celina's mother volunteered because she was hoping that she could get hide a couple peels of potato that they could eat. And so she left, and then someone else, a German soldier, came in, and they decided to do a selection. And the selection at the time was, if you went to the left, you were going to the gas chambers, and the right, you got to live. Celina's was 13. All of them were naked. And the first time through, Mengele told her, pushed her to the left. For some reason, and she has no idea why, he invited them, ordered them to go back through. And this time, Celina says she doesn't know where she got the courage or the voice, but she, in German, said, "Let me live." And he did. He told her to leave, and she ran out into the snow. About 4 or 5 weeks later, they were taken to Brunlitz, and they were still very much prisoners. I mean, there were German guards there, but they were safer than they had been in Poland. What we're going to share in a few minutes, Celina couldn't be here today, but we wanted to share her perception of what was happening to her. After the family was sent to Brunlitz, they were there for about 4 or 5 months before the Russian army liberated Auschwitz on January 27th, 1945. And at that point, they had nothing. And one of the lesser known stories about the Schindlers was that night, the night before the liberation, they looked around the room, and they probably realized it before this, but they looked around the room and realized that the prisoners, the people whose lives they were working very hard to save, had nothing but the clothes on their back. Might have been the striped pajamas. Celina talks about wooden clogs they were given to wear, and that's all they had to their name. Nothing with which to build a new life. So what he did, he and she, because by this time Emily and Oscar had kind of repaired their marriage. Emily joined him in Brunlitz, Czechoslovakia, and worked very hard to save the lives of the prisoners. In fact, Celina talks about Emily having saved her life probably twice. Celina came down with typhoid, which was rampant in the camps, and there was very little food. And she talked about Emily going out and scavenging for food, but then also cooking her a soup and feeding it to her in the hospital. And as much as she credits Oscar Schindler for having saved all their lives, for having put them on the list and followed through with his care, she said Emily was doing the same thing and hasn't gotten the same recognition, because before that, they really hadn't been living together for much of their marriage because of who he was at the time. Well, they got together and they just went around their factory and they looked at everything they had as far as materials and they started giving them to the people. In some cases, it varied. Young men sometimes got a couple bottles of whiskey, which they could use to barter. In the case of families, like the Karps, who were the 3-person family, what they received from the Schindlers was 2 bolts of cloth and 5 pairs of scissors. And what they used those for was exactly what the Schindlers wanted them to do. They used them to pay for transportation. They used them to pay for food. And then a lot of it went to paying for Celina's education. After they were freed, they went back to Poland and they thought that they might be able to go back to their old life. Krakow had been a great life for them before the Germans invaded. And they got back to Krakow, and there was a German officer living in their apartment, and there was no way they were going to get back into it. The Poles had just started passing some anti-Semitic laws again, and they did not feel welcome in their own home country. So they decided to go to Germany instead, which seems an odd choice when you look at it. They went to Mindelheim. They settled in Mindelheim. And over the next couple of years, the next 2 years, they found a nun. There was a convent there in Mindelheim that had cloistered nuns. And they made the connection, and Celina found Mater Leontine. She was an 80-year-old nun who became Celina's private tutor. And that was part of what they used, the scissors and whatever remaining cloth that they had left to pay her to teach. Because Celina had, the whole family had a lot to learn. When you think about your native languages, Polish and Yiddish, you're now living in Germany. And if you want to go to the United States, you not only had to learn, Celina not only had to learn German, she had to learn English as well. And she did. She had a second grade education. She had had no education, obviously, during the war. And she had a lot to make up. She had to learn to study again. She said she hadn't held a pencil in her hand and didn't even know how to do it any longer. And one of the biggest things that Mater Leontine did was to teach her not to hate. When she came to Mindelheim, the family was hated Germans. I mean, after what they'd been through, it was very understandable. And it was very hard for Celina to get past that. But slowly, Mater Leontine got her to see that hatred only hurts the person who hates. The person you hate doesn't even know you're feeling that way. And it's very corrosive to you. And she came away from Mater Leontine with a much better outlook on life. From Germany, they were trying to find a place where they could go. The father, Irvin Karp, had relatives both in Palestine and also in the United States. His brother, David Karp, had come to the United States in 1917. And he actually served in World War I for the United States. When he left Poland, he had to promise that he would go back to Poland and serve in the Polish army, a promise that he broke, and served in the United States Army instead. And he became a very successful businessman. The reason I'm mentioning David is twofold. One, you're sitting on land that he at one time owned. And he was the person whose affidavit, as they called it back then, came through first and was the one who brought his brother and his family here to Des Moines. He was a very successful businessman, auto dealer, and he had some extensive land ownings. There's a Karp Park in Clive that's named after David and the family. So, and then they came here when they were in Munich. They happened to run into Oskar Schindler on the streets, and they obviously knew him. And by that time, Celina was getting closer to, she was 15 rather than 13. And they were very proud of Celina, and they had a conversation. One of the things that Oskar Schindler believed was that by saving his Jewish prisoners, and especially saving families, and there were some other young kids that he saved, not just Celina, that he was saving the next generations. And for him to be able to run into the Karps and to see Celina there, and she was growing, this was the next generation that was being saved. They eventually left Bremerhaven and came to the United States, saw New York, and had absolutely no comprehension of how large the United States was and where Des Moines was. And of course, when they came here to Des Moines, the weather was very different. They came in the summer, and hot, humid Des Moines was a little bit different than where they had been living. One of the interesting things was that when Celina came, she wanted to get back in school. That was one of the main goals. She brought with her all of the notebooks and textbooks and things like that that Mater Leontine had taught her with. And she went to the Des Moines Public Schools, and they gave her some tests. And remember, she only had a formal second grade education. When she tested, they put her in the senior, she was a senior, except for she had to make up 2 classes, one in English Lit and one in American Lit and one in American History. She did those in that summer at East High, and then became a senior at North High School, and eventually graduated from North that same year. She played violin and was very active. She was, again, lucky in many ways, and she says it herself. She had a guidance counselor at North High School who kind of took her under her wing and thought that she'd be a great candidate for Grinnell College. And she took her over to visit Grinnell, and there she arranged for a scholarship for Celina, one of the, the work aid and money scholarships. And that's how Celina graduated from Grinnell. Then after she graduated from Grinnell, she was one of only 2 people in the United States to win a scholarship to Columbia University in New York. And it was there, studying at Columbia, that she met her future husband. They were living in the International House, and they fell in love and married. He became a dentist, and they lived in New York on Long Island until he retired in 1993. Celina's story didn't end with the Holocaust. I mean, her accomplishments in building a good life were amazing. She started volunteering at a school in their hometown in New York, and became very interested in working with children. And she seemed to have a knack for working with children with disabilities. And she eventually became a teacher's aide and then a full-time teacher. And she worked with, again, with students with either physical or with learning disabilities. And what she says is that working with the children gave her back the childhood that she had lost, but also she felt she could identify with them. And when we were researching and writing the book, word got out, as Dr. Friedricks was contacting people across the country, and people had heard Celina's speeches, that we were doing this, and she received several letters from former students who credited her with being the reason that they are what they are today. I was in tears when she sent them to me. One was someone who people thought couldn't read or write and became a screenwriter. Another was someone that again was given up on and became a teacher. And she was that kind of teacher herself. Now, throughout all of this, she didn't really talk about having been in the Holocaust. She said she and her family, and we have video of the Karps talking about it, that they tried to talk a bit about it when they got into Des Moines, but nobody wanted to hear it. As Celina says, there wasn't a common vocabulary. People still couldn't believe that it had happened. They didn't want, you have to remember, in 1945, not the whole world knew about the details of the horrors that went on or the numbers. And it wasn't until 1981 when Thomas Keneally wrote what was called Noah's Ark, Schindler's Ark in Europe, that and talked about Oskar Schindler's story, that the word started to spread. And then Steven Spielberg took the option on the book and eventually made Schindler's List. And when that happened, that's when Celina said the world now had a vocabulary. Schindler's List is her story and her family's story, and everyone, all of the Holocaust story. And now people could understand what was happening. One of her children didn't know it. Her son learned about it, I think, when he was 12 or 13, when he had, mouthed off to his mom, and his dad jumped in and said, "Don't you ever do something like that? Don't you know your mother survived the Holocaust?" He didn't. We in our series of programs that Celina has done for us, we once brought her grandson in as well, because he and a friend at USC had been asked to do a special program for the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz in 2015. Both of them are composers, both of them are pianists, and they were asked to write an original piece of music based on some of the music that was played in the camps, and it was recorded in the 52,000 oral histories that the Shoah Foundation has done. And Celina was going to be representing one of the representatives from the Shoah Foundation on that date. And when I was asking him about it, when he had found out that his grandmother was a Schindler List survivor, and he said that he was probably in his early teens, and Celina had said that she didn't want to tell them because she didn't want to change their view of the world. They didn't want them to see the world as a bad place to live because of what had happened to his grandparents and great-grandparents. And when I asked Alex about it, he said the same thing. He said, "I'm so glad I didn't know, because I would have seen the world as a very different place." And it was at that point that Celina started talking about her story. And she has been to Des Moines quite a number of times, and we're hoping to get her back one more time to be able to tell her story, and for people of all ages to be able to hear the actual testimony of someone who lived through the Holocaust. Celina was supposed to join us for the publication of the book, but unfortunately her husband passed away a week before. And so we're still hoping that maybe we'll get her back this spring or next fall. We're running a little late, aren't we? I'm sorry. That's her basic story. And I can tell it. It always brings me to tears, but we want you to be able to hear it for Celina in her own words. And we're going to have a little bit of a challenge. The video isn't going to be here, but we're going to try and make it so that the audio can be heard. For this commemoration that happened in 2015, Celina attended, as I said, with her grandson. At the same time that this program was being developed, Celina, by chance, was taking a course at one of the local universities. She's a lifelong learner. Whenever I call Celina, I would always wonder if I would get the word, "Oh, she's out at this. She's taking what they called an Ollie course," or she's taking one of these other things, like the Race Society. If she was here, she'd be at the Race Society all the time. But she had registered for a course called Tapestry, and she thought that tapestry was going to be something about old tapestries. When she got into the class, she found out it was to write poetry, and that wasn't something that she ever thought she could do. But she was very worried. The class was relatively small, and she was very worried if she dropped out that the class wouldn't make, and everybody else would be affected. I think many of us have been in that situation when you find yourself in a class you weren't sure you wanted to be in. And she stayed. And what the class enabled her to do was to put into words in a different way what had happened to her. What she did was she went to the commemoration, and when she was there, she said she had kind of an out-of-body experience. She became that 13-year-old girl again at Auschwitz. And then when she got back to California, she started to write poetry about it. And what we're going to listen to today is excerpts from the different poems. There are ones that talk about the arrival at Auschwitz, about her run-in with Dr. Mengele, what it felt to be in the camps, liberation, and her trip to Des Moines. There's the cuts. I mean, we're not able to do the whole thing because she spoke in between each of these, so I put the poems together. But this is Celina, and this is in her own words.
I'll just reach over and grab them. Okay. And I would like to remind everybody that we do, see, I'm not sure if this has been on or not, that these Iowa files will be edited to include
No, it wasn't.
all of the pictures and the video clips and things like that. So give us about a week, and our fantastic videographer, David, will edit everything in so you can see it completely.
And you'll have the pictures.
Yes, yep. So, but this is the best we can do for now.
300 women.
I'm sorry, you didn't hear the
It
question.
was almost end of September,
And
beginning
you
of
said in about a week?
October. One day.
On our website and our YouTube channel.
We, of course, the women left behind
Is this
had
gonna-
no idea where these people were or whether they got to the right place or anything like that.
Can you hear?
2 weeks later, 300 women were put into box cars.
Can you hold this?
And sent off. We traveled a day and a half. It happened to have been at late at night, middle of the night. Since Czechoslovakia isn't so far away, we figured we were back at Schindler's factory. All of a sudden, the doors opened up, and we discovered that we were in Auschwitz. And so my first poem
Can you hear?
has to do with that place. Got too many papers. Sorry. This was written by me in March of 2015, remembering, as I said, when memories unfold, poetry after participation at the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz on January 27, 2015. Night, so dark, so cold, the wagon sways. The rhythmic pounding of the wheels repeating sends a message to my frightened heart. Do not stop beating. The sudden lurch, screech upon steel on steel. The door slides open. Rouse, rouse, angry voices shouting, a multitude of dogs barking. Plumes of fire illuminate the night sky. The smoke drifts over the gathered people. The smell, the awful smell. It is the smell of fear. We have arrived in hell. Auschwitz. group of 30 women to the kitchen to peel potatoes. On one of those days, my mother volunteered to go with the 30 women, hoping that she could bring back some of the potato peels so we could have a little extra food because we were really hungry at that point. It just so happened that on that particular day, when my mother was with the group of 30 women, we were called out of the barracks and taken to another barrack, and it turned out to be a selection. We were told to strip naked, and there was Dr. Mengele, and this is my next poem. Selection. There he stands, resplendent in his uniform, shiny black boots, insignia on his chest, swastika armband on his sleeve, and in his hand a pencil. Unusual, this pencil, for with one flick to either left or right, it has the power to give you life or death. In front of him, a line of naked women, all shapes and sizes. This is my second time confronting the pencil. First time was not lucky, but the pencil beckons the group back in the line. My body is skinny, undeveloped, but clean. Don't know how or why. The will to live forces me to utter 3 words. Lessons in me. This time, the pencil slowly leans towards life. I grab my pile of clothes, hugging them, run out into the snowy outdoors. My pent-up emotions burst forth, hysterically crying, start to put on my clothes. I am only 13, and I've gotten a reprieve from death from Dr. Mengele, the butcher of Auschwitz. An army to liberate us. It's a bedraggled army, a Russian on horse and lots of little people behind him in all kinds of torn uniforms, etc. And that brings me back to my next poem, Liberation. We are survivors. To exit barbed wire gates, 2 days we are waiting, not safe on the outside, with black shirts still marauding. A soldier on a horse appears in the distance. Behind him, a small, bedraggled group of soldiers. They have come to liberate us. We are survivors. The barbed wires gate open. We are free, hesitant to venture beyond. How can one walk alone, not in a row of 5, never overseen by guards, armed, ready to shoot? We are survivors. How after 5 years following orders can we think and act on our own? Will we be able to restore our humanity? Or will we always be held suspect in society? Will there be a rejoining with the rest of the family? Or will we encounter their loss forever gone into eternity? We are survivors. Freedom is ours. Comes with problems. Can we retrieve former lives? Can we go back to homes we've lost? Having experienced horrific events, starving, fearful, we start our journey. 11 days walking, hitching, emaciated scarecrows reach Krakow. There is no welcome. We are not wanted. 4 months later, we're back on the road, leaving Europe, seeking new existence in more welcoming countries. We are survivors. We shall succeed. We got to put our boxcars again, guys. because that was the only transportation 2 years after the war in Germany. And we are going towards Bremerhaven, where we're going to go on a ship that will bring us to the United States. And this is the little poem that I wrote of that. It's called The United States SSC Marlin. That was the name of the ship. The fog horns sound. The engines begin to chug. Today is my birthday. I am 16 years old. The SSC Marlin is a vessel of hope for my new life. I turn and look east, see the continent slowly disappearing. It is a place I know and understand. It is a place that does not want me. Maybe the West will be more welcoming. The SSC Marlin is a troop ship. It ferried soldiers to fight Nazism. Now it ferries Europe's discards, immigrants with guarded hope. Will this new place give them identity? Will it accept their humanity? Only the future will tell. For now, they are happy. They have escaped Europe's hell. Well, we are something that I have to read to you. It's called Tree. In Jerusalem, in Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, in the street of the righteous Gentiles, in a designated third spot from the start, a man plants a tree. Womanizer, cheater, black market profiteer, risk taker, gambler, takes on the biggest gamble of his life. He puts 1,100 names on a list, lies, bribes authorities, wrenches a group of human beings from the jaws of evil. This group, under his protection, will survive the war. Magnificent this tree, dedicated to Oskar Schindler. As it grows and spreads its limbs, roots and branches proliferate. So do the descendants, the saved group's new generations. I bear witness, evil can be harnessed. People of goodwill can make a difference. Forever I shall be in debt and grateful to Oskar Schindler for giving me a life. And I want to thank this community for giving my parents dignity, restoring their humanity, giving them 50 wonderful years of life here, and for giving me the things that I needed to really move forward. Thank you very, very much.
I want to conclude this part of the program by reminding all of us that Celina's story is our story as well. Celina's story is part of the world story. And her story and the other history that we preserve, whether it's the Jordan House, whether it's the Iowa Jewish Historical Society, is what connects us to local, national, and international events and helps us to understand each other and hopefully build a better future. I'd also like to conclude by reading something. On March 25th, the University of Southern California, which houses the Shoah Foundation, awarded the University Medallion to Steven Spielberg and to all of the 52,000 Holocaust survivors who recorded their testimonies through the Shoah Foundation. And the person who represented them at that event received the medal was Celina. There were also about 50 to 100 other Holocaust survivors there. And as part of her speech, these were her words. I believe the human voice speaks louder than history books. I believe that personal experiences can inspire others to value human beings. Today, we're living in a world that was shaped by tremendous divisions and horrible violence. We're seeing a triumphant return of the same kind of anti-Semitism I experienced both before and after the war in Europe. We must never give in to the corrosive power of hatred, and we must always remember the power each individual has to transform the lives of others. I'd be glad to answer any questions and to let you know that we did publish the book. I had planned to bring a copy, but we sold it. It's available for sale on Amazon and on Ice Cube Press, which is a Iowa publishing company. And it has won international acclaim in telling Celina's story. And I would also like to invite you to come visit the Iowa Jewish Historical Society. We're located at the Cass Terrace in Waukee. We have a website, IJHS.online, and I'm sure Gail will include that. And we just encourage you to call ahead. We are in a secured building because of everything that's happening in the world today. And it's easier if we know that you're coming and we can greet you at the door. So with that, what kinds of questions do you have?
Schindler is buried in Jerusalem, right outside the walls.
Sorry, I didn't.
Schindler is buried in Jerusalem.
Yad Vashem, yes.
Yeah. And that was the first place that I saw stones laid on the cemetery stone. Also, I just finished reading this book today.
Oh, good, thank you.
I'm giving it to anybody that's interested. I don't want it back. I bought it for $1. Okay, Charlotte. Very good.
What did she study at Grinnell or at her other college? What did she study at Grinnell?
I'm trying, the first thing she studied was something with medical, and I've forgotten what it was. And then some international, and eventually she studied education. She really enjoyed her time at Grinnell, and she enjoyed North High School. I mean, she enjoyed Des Moines too. And as she said in the recording, her parents came here with her, obviously, in 1947 and lived here their entire lives. It was almost 50 years that her parents, I think her father died in 95 and her mother in 96. And they were an important part of the community here. And two pieces I almost forgot. I can't believe this. We invite you to see at the museum. We have two very important pieces that Celina has donated to us. One is the Schindler Cup, and it's a very plain looking red enamel cup. It's the kind, it was made in Schindler's factories, and he used that enamelware for his prisoners in all of his factories, from what we know. And it's about this high, red, it's burned on the bottom from heating. But what makes it stand out is it was the cup that the Karps brought with them. From what we can determine, and I'll qualify this because history is made every day, people find out new things. It's the only Schindler Cup that we know was which family used it. Phyllis Karp brought it with her, and she used to keep it on the windowsill. And she was asked many a time why she would bring something like that symbolizes the really horrendous time she and her family went through. And she said that every time I look at it, I know that there's a better day. And then the other piece we have that is a pair of Schindler scissors, the last pair. They used 4 of the 5 pairs of scissors for the purposes the Schindlers want them to use, but somehow Celina kept that 5th pair of scissors. In fact, She just used it around the house. She didn't think anything of it. Her son describes, when he found out about her being in the Holocaust and then found out about the scissors, he said, "You mean that's that old pair of scissors that you keep in your sewing box?" And she said, "Yes," and those scissors she gave to us in 2019 to join the Schindler Cup. And from what we can tell, that's the only pair of Schindler scissors that are known at the moment. And we're delighted, we're delighted to have them, but you're welcome to come see those as well. And they're part of a funny story that Celina still teases me about. When she brought the scissors to Des Moines, she'd been used to carrying them to some of the different speeches that she had given in California. When she came to Des Moines, she flew in, and things had changed as far as TSA. And according to her daughter, TSA was confiscated the scissors and was going to throw them out. They were a ½ inch too long for what you can carry on the plane. And thank goodness her daughter is an international attorney and was able to argue TSA, fill them in on what the scissors were, who Celina was, what they were going to be used for, all this information, and she was able to bring them to us. Now, when she told us that, I was worried. As a museum director, you're very worried, because that could happen going back. And I tried to call TSA. I tried to call the Des Moines airport to figure out how we could get these safely back to California. And Celina said, "Just put them in an envelope and mail them." And I said, "No, they could get lost. This is the only pair in the world. Put them in the envelope." Good. Of course we didn't. I couldn't get a hold of TSA or anybody at the Des Moines airport who could make that decision. So we kept them. And I had to promise to get them back to her before her next speech. And it took about 6 months. But what we did was we found an airline. In this case, it was Mid-American. They have their own private planes and they don't go through TSA. So through a connection, Mid-American said, yes, we would be honored to fly these back. And so we gave them personally to the pilot, and he flew them back to California, and then an art limo took them to her house on Valentine's Day, and they arrived at the same time her daughter arrived, which I thought was poetic. But then we said that, okay, next time we want to travel, let's call TSA ahead. We'll make all these arrangements, which we did. But then the next time she just said, "I'm going to go ahead and give them to you now." So they're there, and it's the pair of scissors she used to cut and sew with. So.
Who wrote the book? Is it Friedricks? What was his interest in the story, and why did he write the book?
The question is the author and what was his interest? It was a coming together of different things in our backgrounds. I had worked on Bill and I met when we had worked together on the 50th anniversary of Khrushchev's visit to Iowa. Rachel Garst and I co-chaired that, and Bill represented the Iowa History Center on that, and we got to know each other. He's an award-winning author. He's done quite a number of Iowa history books. He's done biographies of like Bill Knapp and the Hubbles, and most recently, I think Roxanne Conlin. He was director of the time at the Iowa History Center. And I had invited him when Celina first came, the first trips that Celina made on our behalf in 2017, I invited him to come hear her speak. And then when Celina read the poems, and it was a longer poem, she went into more detail about each of the poems and about her history.
and then had done several other programs in the community at Valley High School for the general public, then for all the students in Grinnell and North High. But when we heard the poems, it brought everybody. I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. And it was suggested that we do a book of just the poems. And over the next year or two, the idea of a book was great, but we wanted to kind of expand it, that to include what she had done after the Holocaust, because so many memoirs from the Holocaust talk about the experience there, but not what the life was like afterwards. And Celina, being so young, had her whole life ahead of her, and what she accomplished was amazing with it. So at the same time all this was happening, our president emeritus had an 85th birthday, and her family wanted to do something for her at the museum to honor her. She had been president of the organization for 10 years. She had been one of the ones who had fundraised the money just to build our section of the building out there, helped us get an endowment. So what we wanted to do was to work with them, and they established a fund, the Robbie Winnick Fund at IJHS. And what Robbie decided she wanted to do was make the dream of a book come true. So we started raising money for it. And Celina's homeroom classmate was still a member of the Jewish community, and he became one of the next big donor that helped us get the book. I should say that all of this happened in 4 days. We had the idea of the book, we raised the money in 4 days, and then we said to Bill, during the summer, I had talked to Robbie and I said, this is the person that I think we should consider, and gave her his books to read. And she liked the books and had some other folks read it to make sure this is who we would want. And then we asked him to come talk to us, and he said, what's your time frame? He said, I could do it in about 2 years. And I said, no. He said, I have a contract to start another book on Thursday. And I said, no. I said, Celina's in great health, but she's in her late 80s, and you never know when something can happen. And he said, okay. I don't think he'd been told no quite that way. He teases me about it all the time. And so he figured it out, and we signed a contract for him to write the book. And he became very, very interested in it. Unfortunately, what also happened was this happened in September of 2019. He was still a professor at Simpson, so he couldn't start the book until January, the next semester. And then, of course, what happened in March was COVID. And not only was he not able to go out and interview Celina, but he couldn't fly. We had budgeted to have him go meet people. So all of the interviews had to be done on the phone. The way he tells it, he got very lucky because right before COVID hit, he went to the library and got tons of books out about, basic research about the Holocaust and Celina and that. Well, the library's closed, so he was able to keep the books for months and months. So there were some good things on that. So that was kind of, it was a mutual interest. He had heard her speak and was very interested in her story. And they did hit it off when they did talk on the phone. And in fact, she recently did, and it's on our it's on the website for the Reagan Library. They did a talk at the President Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in July, about the book and her experiences there, because they were hosting the the International Auschwitz exhibit. And so that's kind of how we all got together. And he's doing a second book for us as well. We're going to officially announce it next month.
I'm gonna stop you.
That's-
Wait, no, I'm not kicking you out.
Okay.
I'm just putting a pause on it to be respectful to our videographer. I want to thank you. You do not need to leave. You can still ask questions. I just want to be able to let David and his lovely wife be able to shut down in a timely manner. So thank you for coming. Again, this recording and with all of the pictures, the audio, the video will be available on the West Des Moines Historical Society's YouTube channel and our Facebook page. So just Google WDMHS or West Des Moines Historical Society, or look at our website. I've got links to both of those. So next month is our last Iowa Files for this season. So it's only appropriate we start talking about a beloved summer event, the Iowa State Fair. So Mindy Williamson, Marketing Director for the Iowa State Fair, will share stories and photos about this celebration of all things Iowa. So thank you so much for coming. Again, if you don't have to leave. We're just going to shut down the live stream. Yes, ma'am? Yep. Okay, so I'm going to shut this down, and then please feel free to keep asking. I know, but okay, ma'am, yes, do you have a question?